we look at the air power of the mighty Soviet Union, we have to throw away many preconceived ideas. First, the Soviet Union is not Russia, though that individual republic is the biggest part of it, just as England is the biggest part of the United Kingdom. For example, A.I. Mikoyan, who gave his name to the design bureau which produced these aircraft, was a native of another Soviet republic, Armenia. Second, there is not one, but many Soviet air forces. They include autonomous air armies, the frontal or tactical aviation, military transport aviation, all part of the main air force, the VVS. There is also naval aviation and the vast PVO, the Air Defense Forces, which comprises interception regiments and many thousands of surface-to-air missiles, more than the rest of the world combined. Maybe that is to be expected, because the Soviet Union is the world's biggest country. Right from its birth, the Soviet Union has felt itself surrounded by enemies. Indeed, from 1918, there was civil war, and the Western Allies, who had fought alongside the troops of the Tsar, tried to help the White Russian armies defeat the Reds, or the Bolsheviks. They failed, but this left the new USSR with the belief that the allies of old Russia were the enemies of the Soviet Union. Indeed, Lenin proclaimed that the capitalist countries would forever try to destroy this pioneer communist state. It is a belief that has been taught in Soviet schools ever since, and is emphasized by the fact that the state has always maintained huge armed forces. By the 1930s, the Soviet Union was eager to show the achievements of nationwide centralized planning. It wanted to think big, and it was proud of the AN-T-20 Maxim Gorky, largest aircraft in the world, which was the flagship of a propaganda squadron, and often flew escorted by I-5 fighters to show its huge size. But the rise of Nazi Germany in the 1930s threatened the fledgling Soviet state, and the Red Army, already weakened by terrible internal divisions and purges, which had removed many of its key officers, was not ready to repel an invasion. On the 22nd of June, 1941, Hitler unleashed 5 million troops in 190 divisions against the USSR. The resulting conflict saw vast tracts of the Soviet Union ravaged and under fascist control. This was known by the Soviets as the Great Patriotic War. The Luftwaffe was ordered to destroy the cities. To defend their motherland, thousands of young men and women from all over the Soviet Union joined the Air Defense Group, which included barrage balloons, anti-aircraft guns, and fighters. The battle for control of the air over the cities was long and hard. The most numerous fighters were the Yaks, of which over 37,000 were built, more than any other type of fighter in history, despite the fact that in September and October 1941, to avoid being bombed, the entire production had to be moved far to the east, often to places where there were no railways and only dirt roads. But there was never a shortage, either of fighters or of pilots, and no fewer than 93 members of the Air Defense Group were invested as heroes of the Soviet Union, an honor never bestowed lightly. These BF-110s, BF-109s, and FW-190s were among the more than 7,300 fascist aircraft confirmed as destroyed by the Air Defense Group, whose equipment was swelled by large numbers of American Air Cobras and British Hurricanes. The tide began to turn in favor of the Soviet Union. A lasting bond of friendship was formed with France, whose pilots formed a special unit, the Normandie Niemen Regiment. With a score of 237 confirmed victories, it was by far the top-scoring French unit of World War II, and, symbolically, one of its members will remain on the strength of today's all-Soviet unit forever. Many thousands of families in the Soviet Union have seen fathers, sons, and even grandsons serve in the defense of the motherland. In the Great Patriotic War, David Yachuk flew no fewer than 820 combat missions. mostly in SB-2 bombers. Not many details have filtered through to the outside world about the massive Soviet bomber campaign, using SB-2s, IL-4s, Tu-2s, and other types, which put down more bombs on the fascist heartlands than the combined weight of the RAF and US Army Air Forces. No air force in the world has a greater sense of history than that of the VVS, the Central Air Force of the Soviet Union. Virtually every cadet visits the Air Force's museum at Monino to see the actual Lavochkins, Yaks, and MiGs that drove off the invaders. After graduating from high school, thousands of cadets each year start along the long road that leads to being a Soviet combat pilot. Right at the start, remotely piloted model airplanes are used to instill a feeling for air combat and a sense of how to achieve a dominant tactical position. This is something ignored in the West. These youngsters plan to go on to a military air school where they will be instructed and monitored by political officers. Western Air Force aircrew know nothing of instruction along the lines of patriotism and political dogma, but in the Soviet Union, it is all important. Also important is the use of gliders. Here at the Vinnytsia Aero Club in the Ukraine, Czech-built Blanik tandem seat training gliders are used as the first step in the flying training course. This young man is the third generation of his family to look ahead to a career in the Soviet Air Force. Most pilots do training on gliders at their nearest aero club. Many then go on to a very demanding aerobatic training on such agile aircraft as the Su-26 or Yak-55 and the Yak-53, here practicing in formation. Probably the best aerobatic trainers in the world. With such practical flight training behind them, the cadets feel ready to face the tough course at an Air Force Flight Academy. Here they are cut down to size and reminded that every mission starts from the ground and must be properly planned, and the political training is intensified. Before they ever get into a cockpit, they further polish their skills in repeated sessions on electronic simulators. Experienced frontline commanders and political workers pass on their knowledge to the cadets during every waking hour. After weeks of training, at last comes the thrill of the first flight. The standard jet trainers are built in Czechoslovakia, the L-29 Delphin, seen here, and the L-39 Albatros. Both are tough, all-metal aircraft, much more advanced than anything the cadet has seen before. From his front cockpit, he can see all that happens. But on the first flight, he is little more than a passenger. No mask need be worn, and he comes along for the ride as the experienced backseat instructors demonstrate a complete mission. Included is flying in loose formation. Over the coming months, each cadet becomes not just able to fly, but totally at home under the most demanding circumstances. At last comes the great day of graduation, when all the fortunate cadets pass out as fully qualified Soviet pilots, ready for posting to a combat training unit. First comes a combat training regiment, of the kind known in the West as a Combat Crew Training Wing, or Operational Conversion Unit. Here, the eager fledglings make the acquaintance of the MiG-21.